So you want to be a pro musician, but you don't know where to start. Where do you even get started meeting the kind of people that can get you to the next stage in your career? How do you even get the chance to be in the room, to go do auditions for touring gigs, or to be in a great band? Woody Allen once said, 80% of success is showing up. So what do I mean by just show up? Well, you got to get in the room. You got to get out and play. You have to take every single playing opportunity that you possibly can. And you've got to take every opportunity to meet folks and network so that you can get your name out there and get noticed. It's an extremely broad topic, but basically what I'm getting at is shut off the phone, turn off the computer, and get out there in the world and gain the kind of knowledge that you can only get by putting yourself out there in musical situations. It could just be that you're going to see a band play and you're going to do a little networking, making some friends while you're there, or maybe you're going out to local jam nights and you're going to get up on stage and play in some unfamiliar musical situations. You always learn something every single time you do that. Also, getting together and doing writing sessions or studio recording with musicians maybe you're familiar with or maybe you're not. Getting out there, doing it, networking, and gaining experience the whole time. You got to just show up. So let me go all the way back to the beginning when I was a guitar student. I had a teacher named Brian Hughes for a while. This was around the time that I was 14 or 15 years old. Brian is a great local guitar player that's gone on to have a terrific jazz guitar career. He's got a whole bunch of records out, and he's a record producer as well. Anyways, back then he was playing in a cover band in Edmonton, Canada, and he would invite me to come down and sit in. Now, keep in mind, I'm 14 years old. I was way too young to be in these clubs. The drinking age in Alberta is 18, but I looked old for my age, and so I could sneak in and make it work. So I would learn the songs that he would tell me to learn, and then I would come down and he'd let me sit in with them. I can clearly remember the bass player in the band kind of rolling his eyes when I would get up on stage and stuff going, oh God, we got to deal with this kid. But Brian was so cool. He would let me come down and sit in and get up on those stages. And that meant so much to me at that early age, just a chance to get up and play with these older experienced musicians and get to see what it sounded like and felt like to be up on a real stage playing through a loud guitar amp with a real band. That was so important to me. And it was also really scary. I remember that, having to get up on those stages and play with those musicians. You know, I was scared shitless at times, but I would just do it anyway. I would force myself, to just jump in the deep end and go for it. So just showing up, and I learned so much through doing it. So I really like to go out and see bands play. I like to see what made them tick and learn as much as I could just by observing. And I also like to meet the people that were in these bands and make friends with them as much as a kid that was my age could, and garner as much knowledge as I could. So one of my future episodes is going to be about mentors, and I'll touch on meeting some of these people and some of the things I learned from them. But this one's all about just showing up. So I remember meeting a guy named Al Vermew. He was in a band called Click. They were a super hot local band that was on the Western Canadian cover band circuit. That was a thing in the 80s and the 90s where bands would roll into town and they'd play 5 or 6 nights a week, 3 sets a night, and they'd play songs by all kinds of rock and roll bands. So I remember Click doing great sets of, whole sets of music by The Who, Led Zeppelin, Rush. They were just a really, really good band. So Al would let me come in and sit in as well. The way I met him, I just went up to him one night after a set. Once again, I wasn't supposed to be in the club. I was maybe 16 years old, and the drinking age was 18, so I had snuck in. And I remember walking up to him one night and saying, hey man, you're really great. Can you teach me some stuff on guitar? And he was really kind. He kind of took me under his wing, kind of became like a great friend, an older brother figure almost to me. I learned a lot about life as well as playing guitar from him. But one thing that he would let me do is sit in with the band. So I remember learning songs by Rush or Max Webster, and he would get me up to sit in. So just getting in the room with those pro musicians up on a loud stage and playing was so important when I was 16, 17 years old. So fast forward a year or two, I'm living the dream. I go to LA to attend MI, Musicians Institute. Now, a lot of people ask me, what did you learn at MI? And, I learned academic things there, but I also learned a lot of real world gigging experience by just showing up. And by just showing up, I mean this. To get through the curriculum at MI wasn't that hard. You could graduate that school and not really take advantage of, I would say, at least half of the opportunities that were available to you. To jam, play with other musicians, get in the room, and just learn things. So for instance, there was these elective kind of live performance workshops, is what they called them, where they would try and sort of simulate a club experience where you'd have to get up on stage and play with some musicians that maybe you didn't know or never played with before. So the live performance workshops work like this. They would let you know a week in advance, learn this song, say a Led Zeppelin song or something. And then you'd go in there, sign up on a sheet, and you'd get your chance to get up and play the song. And then the teachers or instructors on guitar, bass, drums, vocals, they would critique your performance. So I was assigned a private instructor at MI, like every student there, that would kind of keep you on track with the curriculum. You would take a lesson once a week with them. I was assigned to a fellow named Nick Nolan. So Nick was also the guitar instructor that was doing the live performance workshop this one week that I went in to do it. So I got up, played the song, whatever the designated song was that week. I thought I did really well. It felt great. I had my lesson with Nick later that week, and he said, I wanted to talk about your playing the other day and the performance that you did. And he said, I remember doing one of those things once because he'd been a student at MI, and he said, I learned the song perfectly, and I got up on stage and played it just note for note, did it just perfect. And he said, then a guy got up after me, and he kind of stumbled up on the stage with his guitar and plugged it into the bass amp, went to the wrong amp, and then went over to the guitar and plugged it into the right. And he said he was just kind of out of it, but he was just kind of had a real punk rock, like, I don't care attitude. And he said when he played the song, he did it maybe 70% as perfect musically as what Nick had been able to pull off. But he said the crowd response afterwards was way louder. And he said, in that moment, he realized that it was about this guy performing and just kind of giving it up and going for it because he had this kind of punk rock, I don't care attitude. And I think Nick saw some of himself in me and had maybe seen some of that. Like, I've always been a little bit anal retentive. I want to get everything perfect, every single note and the right tone and all that stuff. And Nick saw that I had that kind of personality, and he was like, let it go, man. Like, just kind of play, not quite as accurate, but perform, get up there and go for it. He wasn't telling me to completely abandon my approach. He appreciated the attention to detail and everything I put into learning the music and getting the right sounds and all that stuff. He was just saying, dial that back 10% and put that into performance and just getting kind of crazier and a little bit looser and a little more reckless with your playing. And that's something that I've carried through. I mean, when people tell me, what did you learn at MI? For whatever reason, that one experience always sticks in maybe the top 4 or 5 things that I was able to learn at MI. And so by just putting myself out there in that room, in that live performance situation, and then having Nick kind of give me some feedback, I remember that was some great real world advice I got by just kind of showing up. Some of the jamming experiences I picked up on there were huge as well for me as far as my development goes. I mean, I remember jamming in P100, the big performance hall, with Tim Bogert on bass. And Tim was calling chord changes, the 2, the 4, the what, just holding up his fingers. I'd never done that before I saw Tim do it that day. And it was sink or swim. And I just remember thinking, man, I'm up here with this guy that played with Jeff Beck in the 70s. Like, this is killer. That was an elective class. I didn't have to get up there and do that day, but I just threw myself in that situation and did it. There was also what was called open counseling sessions. And this was where a teacher, say Scott Henderson or Jennifer Batten or Tim Bogert, would be in a room for a few hours every day, and as many students could file into that room and fit in there, could come in and jam with them or ask them questions, and it was just such a valuable resource. But once again, this was something where you just had to get out there and do it. Just put yourself in the room. It was like going to the gym. You don't get the benefits from it unless you show up and get in there and do it. Nobody was going to make you go do it. So I would show up and get in the room with these people, and sometimes I'd just sit and listen, and other times I'd actively participate. I remember one day Tim was doing a class on singing. Tim could sense that I was a little timid as a singer. And he said to me, okay, pretend you're trying to get your mother's attention across the parking lot. How do you do that? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, call her. And I felt silly, and he said, well, just do it. And I said, Mom, and he's like, what are you doing? Ma! He's like, that's how you do it. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, that's so simple. I can do that. In the moment where you're not thinking about being intimidated about singing, you just take a deep breath and you do it. And that taught me so much right in that moment. Didn't have to show up to that class that day. Didn't have to take that elective thing. And I did it. And I learned one of the most important singing lessons that I possibly could have ever learned. So I ate that stuff up. I mean, certain students would show up there at 9 a.m. and they would be there until 8 or 9 p.m. Other students would maybe show up at 10 a.m. for the first class and they'd leave right at 6. So I always remember just showing up and doing as much as you possibly could when the opportunities were there. I mean, I used the library at MI a lot. I was taking advantage of as much of that material as I possibly could. So once I got out of MI and finished the school, one resource I used a lot was the musicians referral service. MI had a musicians referral where they would sometimes get calls from bands or record labels. They were looking for musicians to do tours or looking for musicians to fill slots in bands. And that seemed like a great resource to me. So I'd always call them and ask them if they had any new calls from anybody, anything they could send me out on. So that was some of my earliest auditions, was through the MI musicians referral service. So this is how I met a guitar player named Frank Symes, who had a huge impact on my career. Frank was a guy that had called the MI Musicians Referral Service because he had an original band he was looking for a guitar player for. But Frank was also a sideman with artists like Don Henley. He was also his musical director, and he'd just gotten a gig playing with Mick Jagger. He'd worked with Warren Zevon. I mean, he had a really, really great career. So MI Musicians Referral Service let me know there's this guy named Frank. He's looking for a guitar player for his band. He plays with Don Henley. I was like, that sounds interesting. So I called up Frank and he said, well, why don't you come out and meet me? And I drove out to his home studio, met him there, and he played me some of his original music. And it sounded kind of like T-Rex meets Badfinger or something. It was really cool. I really liked it. And he said, is this something you could see yourself doing? And I said, yeah, I'm totally interested. Keep in mind, I'm like 20 at this point and he's like 37. So there's this big age gap and I'm seeing all this opportunity to learn and get in the room with this guy that's got all this experience and these great gigs. So he gave me a cassette of some of their songs and maybe 3-4 tunes. And I remember learning them as best I could, get the tones really together, getting all the parts together. And he said, okay, meet me at this address in like a week and we'll do an audition. So I drive out to this place and it's a rehearsal facility in the San Fernando Valley. I had no idea what to expect. And I get there and it's this place that's just this huge complex with these great big rooms. He was actually set up rehearsing with Don Henley for a tour in one of these rooms. And he booked the room next door for my audition. So I'd never seen a place like this. I go in and I'm setting up my gear in this room. And the drummer, Jimmy from the band, was in there setting up his kit. This is the first time I'd met him and I'm getting my stuff plugged in. And somebody sticks their head in the room and they say, hey, here's a guy in here that looks like me. And Jimmy looks up from behind his drum kit and he looks over at the door and he goes, without missing a beat, no, Steve, you look like me. And it's Steve Perry from Journey at the door. So once again, I'm 20 years old. I'm in this rehearsal facility. You know, Don Henley's rehearsing next door. Steve Perry just came in. I was like, I think I found myself in a good group of people. So I tried to play the shit out of the audition. I did the best I could to get that gig, and I ended up getting the gig. So I worked with that band, writing and demoing for the next 5 years, playing countless gigs. We would go and play cover gigs as well as original gigs and working on writing songs and material. And that was a great lesson for me, to get out with these guys and play cover gigs. I mean, this was an experienced group of musicians, and to see them, not just musically how they would approach it, because they'd always kill it musically, but also their attitude towards playing a cover gig was exactly the same as how they would go into playing a big tour with somebody like Don Henley or Mick Jagger. You know, Frank, when he got up on stage in front of 10 people or 100 people or 10,000 people, he didn't play any different. He put himself out there and he gave it 100% always. And at 20 years old, for me to see that was so important. So that band ended up getting a record deal eventually. We lasted for about 5 years and we ended up getting signed in Japan for the Japan and Southeast Asia markets. We put out a record for those markets and then the band ended up splitting up. Now I had to figure out what to do with myself next. I had all the musician and music business people, all those contacts that I'd made during that band, of course. So I put out the word and the feelers to all of them that I was looking for a gig, looking for more things to do. And also, I ended up just literally scouring the local music papers and looking for wanted ads for musicians. So the Music Connection, the Recycler, anything I could look for in LA. I mean, this is pre-internet, keep in mind. So I was just calling the local, whatever numbers were in the local regs and getting together for jams with cover bands and original artists that were songwriters and were looking for guitar players. Whatever I could think of, I was just doing it all. I was just showing up. I would go to open mic nights. I didn't know what else to do. I did a lot of gigs that I didn't really enjoy doing. I mean, getting together with some singer-songwriters and I didn't really end up liking their material, and we'd go out and play. But there was always something to learn, you know. Maybe you were playing at a new club you'd never played at, or maybe there was another band on the bill that night that you could see and meet and make friends with, and always connections to be made. And there was always a reason to just show up. So eventually a drummer in LA that I'd made friends with, his name was Rob Ladd, he called me up and said, hey, I'm going to go out on the road with an artist. She's got a record coming out. She's got a song that looks like it's going to be a hit. And we're going to head out and we need a guitar player. Would you be interested in auditioning for the gig? I, of course, jumped at that chance and I learned the songs I was supposed to learn. I went out for the audition. So when I got there, I realized it was kind of a cattle call audition. There was like 30 guitar players there and I was like, wow. But I went in and I did my best, and I ended up getting really, really far in that audition. I was actually the second runner-up. I almost got the gig. And there was a guy that was really organizing that audition that was hired to do it. And I think when it came to me, he was like, who's this guy that almost got the gig that I haven't heard of? So you better believe I got his number and stayed in touch with him, and he was very, very pivotal in my career. So you never know when you're going to meet these kinds of people, but he ended up being the one that introduced me to a bunch of bands and got me in on auditions where I ended up getting the gigs. If I think back, there was a band called Sparkler that I was in for about a year on Giant Records. Blink of the Star was a band on DreamWorks that I toured with for a year and a half. After that was 40 Foot Echo, who I recorded an album with, went on tour with. That was a Hollywood Records band. There was also a great band called The Shore that I ended up playing with for a while that was on Maverick Records. And not too long after that, it was Courtney Love that he introduced me to, and Nine Inch Nails, and then eventually Chris Cornell. So once again, just showing up for that audition, the initial audition that I did with the singer-songwriter that my buddy Rob Ladd was playing with, that day really changed my whole life. And some days you don't feel like showing up, but you kind of have to, and you should. And maybe because you don't feel like doing it, it's actually going to work in your favor. I'll give you an example. When I met Courtney Love, I was on an airplane coming back from New York City to LA, and I had to actually change planes in Chicago. I had a crappy connection. When we landed in Chicago, there was a message on my cell phone. It was from Courtney Love. I hear you're a cool guitar player, and I want you to come out and jam with me tomorrow at a rehearsal studio. I wasn't feeling great on the plane. I remember that. It seemed like I was getting ill, but I said, yeah, absolutely. I'll come out tomorrow. Tell me where to be and when to be there. Ended up being at SIR Rehearsal Studios in LA. By the time my next plane hit the ground in LA, I was sick. I was getting the flu, full-blown flu. She'd given me a little bit of material she wanted me to listen to that night, so I got home, played a bit of guitar, listened to what she wanted me to go over. It was going to be a very loose sort of audition situation where we just get together and jam, really. So I took some NyQuil and went to bed, tried to get a good sleep. I got up the next day, sick. Full-on respiratory flu, not feeling great, not feeling like going to an audition. But I took some Dayquil, got myself going, and got in the car and drove over to SIR. Courtney was late, probably about a half an hour, not too bad. And I remember sitting in there with my acoustic guitar and just being kind of on cold medicine and just really kind of out of it. And she showed up and sat down and we started to play and we kind of hit it off. And I was in this mood where I'd shown up and I was, not feeling great, but I was so mellow that day because of the cold medicine and because I was ill. Anyway, she ended up wanting to work with me. And I always remember later on saying, everybody else that showed up that day seemed like they were freaked out by me, but you were just so calm. So I think actually having the flu actually worked in my favor. I always remember her saying, well, I want to put a band together and just write some songs and go out and play. And I was like, well, I'll be your guitar player if you want. I think she just thought it was kind of funny that I was so sort of aloof and just like, yeah, that's cool. Anyway, once again, getting in the room, showing up, even though I was sick, I went out and did it anyway. So I ended up playing with her for a while. She wanted to rehearse a lot and work on new material. So I would go to SIR Rehearsal Studio maybe 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time and jam with her quite a bit during these times. She ended up booking a writing room at the Village, classic LA recording studio. And I would go there and write songs with her and just record till all hours in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning, whatever she wanted to do. I was at this place in my life where I was just willing to go and show up when she wanted me to be there. I also ended up setting up a small recording studio in a ballroom at a house that she was renting in LA during this time. And I would go there, we'd sometimes watch TV for a little while, then go in the ballroom, write songs till all hours in the morning. I was just showing up and doing the work. So we ended up making an album together that never ended up getting released. But I'm forgetting now, it's either 2 or 3 songs that we ended up working on during those times ended up on the Last Hole album. So I've got co-writes on the Last Hole record. Courtney's the one that ended up not too long after that introducing me to Linda Perry. Linda and I became good friends and I ended up doing sessions with Alicia Keys, Daniel Powter, James Blunt, Pink, all kinds of people. And it was all really when I look back on it because I went to the audition with Rob Ladd. Rob introduced me to the local musician headhunter guy. He introduced me to a whole bunch of bands, and fast forward to 2006, I got in the room when I had the flu with Courtney Love, but she liked me. Once again, what did Woody say? 80% of success is just showing up. I can guarantee you one thing. You will not get 100% of the gigs that you don't show up for. My audition with Chris Cornell, I've told the story many times. I actually alluded to it in the last video in this series, but I only had about 12 hours notice to learn his material. I wasn't quite as prepared as I would have liked, but I did the best I could, got the tones together the best I could, got the parts together the best I could, and on 3 hours sleep, I went in and did it. I just showed up. You never know when one of those moments is just going to change your life, and for the next 3 years, I ended up going out on the road and playing over 300 shows with his band. So if you take anything away from this video, just know that one thing leads to another. You got to just show up, from the time that you're really young and just taking guitar lessons, showing up for those guitar lessons. That's the most important thing. Just get in the room with that teacher. Show them that you're interested. Show them that you care. They're going to introduce you to other people. If you go to a music school like MI, Berkeley, or even a local music college, whatever it is, of course, you got to show up to the classes that you're mandated to go to. But if there's other elective stuff or events going on, show up, go. Even if you're in a small town, if there's local jam nights, go to those, show up, meet people. And certainly if you're in a big music city like LA or Nashville, show up at every available opportunity. Write with people, play with people, get up and jam, get in the room, write songs, do whatever you can do. And 80% of success really is just showing up. All right, that's it for this week. Please check out my record, Pete Thorn 2. All the links are in the video description below. Please hit the thumbs up if you dug the video, share it, and please subscribe to my channel. I'll see you soon on the next So You Want to Be a Pro Musician. Take it easy.